He arrived in the United States with a tourist visa and a simple plan: work, save money, and return home. But life surprised him with something he never planned for: love, family, and the constant fear of losing it all. Armando built dreams with his own hands, and what he did to protect them will move you deeply. Miami, summer of 2005. The heat stuck to your skin like a warning. For many, it was just a city with beaches, palm trees, and opportunities. For Armando, it was either everything or nothing. He had left San Pedro Sula with a borrowed suitcase, a couple of shirts, a passport with a tourist visa, and a heart full of promises. His mother, Doña Lydia, said goodbye at the airport with eyes red from crying and hands trembling from prayer. "Come back, son. Don't get lost there," she said, squeezing his fingers tightly. "3 months, Mom, that's all. I'll save up the money and return. I swear." But when he got off the plane and stepped onto the hot ground of Miami International Airport, something inside him changed. It wasn't the language, or the hurried faces, or the signs in English. It was the feeling of being in a place where, for the first time, no one knew him. No one expected anything from him, and somehow that gave him freedom. If you like interesting stories, give us a like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our content. And tell us in the comments where you're watching this video from. We'd love to hear from you. Armando was 27 years old, thin, with brown skin and hands accustomed to hard work. In Honduras, he had been a mason since he was 14. Here, he was invisible. No one asked about his papers if he worked fast and didn't talk much. In his first week, he slept on the couch of a distant cousin, Julio, who shared an apartment with 3 other men in Hialeah. There were cockroaches, heat, and noise, but also a promise of dollars per day that he never could have imagined back home. Julio got him his first job in a kitchen remodel in Kendall. "Don't talk too much. Just do what they tell you," he warned. Armando nodded, swallowing hard. From that first day, he worked as if his life depended on it. Because it did. He demolished tiles, hauled debris, sanded walls. At night, he wrote in a notebook about expenses, money earned, and how much he still needed to send to his mother, his siblings. He counted the days to fulfill his promise to return. But something started to happen. You couldn't notice it at first. Maybe it was when a homeowner gave him an extra bill for leaving everything spotless, or when a neighbor offered him another job, or when he felt for the first time that he could walk down the street without feeling the weight of stairs. He could be nobody, and at the same time be everything he wanted. The 3-month plan kept stretching without him noticing. Just 1 more month, he told himself. But each month brought more work, and each dollar brought him closer not only to helping his family, but to dreaming of something of his own. In weekly calls with Doña Lydia, he no longer talked about the return date. "And when are you coming back, dear?" she would ask, her voice breaking. "Soon, Mom. Just a little more. I'm saving well. I don't want to return empty-handed." But it wasn't just about the money anymore. There was something more. A voice inside him whispering that here, there was space to build something bigger, something he never imagined. Miami didn't embrace him. It tolerated him, ignored him, but that was enough for him. Because between each drywall repair, each fixed leak, each installed floor, Armando began to imagine staying, silently, without telling anyone. As if just thinking it could curse it. His passport with the stamp that said 90 days remained in his suitcase. 75 had already passed. One night, while eating rice with eggs and plantain on a plastic plate, he asked Julio, "And you never thought about going back?" Julio let out a dry laugh. "Back to what, Armando? There's nothing there. Here, with fear, you live better than there without fear." That left him thinking for hours. That night, he couldn't sleep. He looked at his passport. He had barely 2 weeks left before being out of status, and that scared him more than anything else. Not for him, but for what he was already starting to build inside himself. It wasn't just a dream. It was a life that was growing slowly, like a root that creeps underground before breaking through the cement. The next day, he walked alone to South Beach. It was the first time he'd stepped on the ocean since he arrived. He sat on the sand, looking at the horizon, and wondered if it was worth risking so much for something that still had no shape. And there, with the sun falling like fire over the waves, he made a promise. Not to his mother, not to his country, to himself. If I stay, it won't be to hide. I'm going to build something, with fear, with doubts, but with all my heart. That was the real day Armando crossed the border. Not the geographic one, the inner one. The sun was just beginning to rise when Armando was already on his feet. It was 5:30 in the morning, and the sound of the old alarm clock, the one Julio had given him because cell phones sometimes freeze, marked the beginning of another day that would resemble the previous one, and yet would bring him closer to the abyss. Each morning, before leaving, he looked at the passport hidden in a shoebox under the air mattress where he slept. He'd take it out, open it, look at the entry stamp, and put it back. His tourist visa had expired 3 weeks ago. The clock now didn't mark hours. It marked dangers. Outside, Miami was beginning to wake up. Fast cars, workers at bus stops, neighbors watering plants without knowing, or without wanting to know, that there were men like him repairing roofs, installing floors, building walls without permits, without insurance, without guarantees. Invisible. Armando walked quickly, head down. Although they'd never stopped him before, fear was there, stuck to his back like a cold sweat that wouldn't come off even with a shower. He felt it in his chest every time a parked patrol car passed by, in his hands when he heard a siren in the distance, in his eyes when someone looked at him for a second longer than normal. His work that day was at a small house in Westchester. Repair a wall with moisture leaks. An elderly Cuban lady, a widow, kind but distrustful. "And how did you learn this?" she asked while he prepared the mix. "Since I was a child. My father was a mason in Honduras. I learned from him." "Ah, and do you have papers?" she asked naturally, as if asking about the weather. Armando smiled and looked away. "I just came for a while. I'm seeing if I'll return soon." The lady didn't insist, but from that day on, she started locking the door while he worked. That was the life of the illegal. Always measured, always evaluated, never completely accepted. He was there to work, not to stay. That day, when he returned home, Julio was waiting for him with an envelope. "Mario called. He wants to know if you can go see a job in Coral Gables tomorrow. It pays $100 a day, but they want to start at 6 sharp. "Sure, I'll go," he responded without hesitation. Armando didn't say no. He couldn't afford that luxury. Each dollar was one less night of anguish. Each day worked, one step further from the hunger he'd left behind. But the more the client network grew, the more vulnerable he became. In Coral Gables, the houses were big. The neighbors were from another world. Many were Americans who didn't speak Spanish. Any misunderstanding could end in a call to immigration. Armando started taking precautions. He shaved more carefully, wore clean clothes without stains. He learned basic phrases in English. "I'm here to work. I'm with the contractor. I'll be quick." He avoided raising his voice. He smiled more than necessary. He said, "Yes, sir," even when he didn't understand half of what they told him. His body was in Miami, but his mind lived in constant alert. At the house in Coral Gables, where he was supposed to repair a kitchen with moisture problems, he met Teresa, a Salvadoran nurse who lived with her mother and 6-year-old daughter. She wasn't the homeowner, but the tenant of the small apartment in the back. "Are you going to work here?" she asked when she saw him arrive with his toolbox. "Yes, ma'am. I'm going to check the moisture on the back wall." "Don't call me ma'am, please. It makes me feel old. I'm Teresa." And then, for the first time in a long time, Armando let his guard down, just a little, because there was something in Teresa's voice, a mix of strength and tenderness, that disarmed him. That afternoon, while he worked, she offered him water, then coffee, and finally, when it was almost nightfall, she invited him to dinner. Here we cooked to share. I don't like seeing someone eat alone. Armando accepted, grateful. And sitting at the table with her, her mother and the girl, whose name was Daniela, and who looked at him with the curiosity of someone seeing something new, he felt for a moment something he hadn't felt since leaving Honduras. Home. But the clock kept ticking. The following week, when Teresa saw him again, she asked directly, "Are you without papers?" Armando didn't lie. "Yes, my visa expired. I was planning to return, but I don't know. I kept staying." She nodded without judging. "My brother also went through that. It's not easy, but I understand." From that day on, something between them changed. But outside those small lights, the world continued to be dark. One night, while returning from a job in Homestead, a patrol car passed by him. For no reason, it just passed. But Armando felt his whole body freeze. He imagined the officers getting out, asking for papers, taking him away in handcuffs while his mother in Honduras waited for a call that would never come. He arrived home trembling. Julio looked at him in silence. "You get used to it, or you learn to live with fear. There's no other way." But Armando didn't want to get used to it. He didn't want to live hidden all his life. And yet, he saw no way out. At the end of that month, he sent his first big remittance to Honduras, $700. Doña Lidia called crying. "With this, we're going to fix the house roof, son. I promised you, didn't I?" He hung up the phone with eyes full of tears, because he knew that with each help sent, he tied himself more to this country that didn't want him, but which he could no longer leave. The clock was now not just a reminder of the past. It was a time bomb. And he didn't know how much longer he could bear before everything exploded. The work at the Coral Gables house extended longer than expected. What would be a simple moisture repair turned into a complete remodeling. New walls, electrical installation, painting, even cabinet replacement. Each week that passed, Armando returned to that place like just another worker. But in silence, he began to feel part of something different. Teresa always welcomed him with an honest smile, without ornaments. She didn't wear makeup, dressed simply with her nurse's uniform and hair tied in a messy ponytail. But her eyes, large, warm, tired, spoke for her. "I had the night shift today," she'd say, with a slightly hoarse voice. "But I still made coffee. I know you're going to have a long day." Armando accepted the coffee with cracked hands, exhausted body, but peaceful soul. At Teresa's house, he didn't feel like he had to pretend. There, it didn't matter if he was legal or illegal. He was just himself. And that was already a lot. The relationship grew like roots grow, slowly, without calling attention, but getting deeper each time. There were no declarations of love or grand gestures, just a trust that was woven between kitchen conversations, shared lunches, and improvised games with Daniela, who no longer called him Sir, but Mando. One afternoon, while he painted the back fence, Teresa sat on a garden chair with a cold drink. "My dad used to say that love is like planting a tree. If you take care of it, it gives shade. If you neglect it, it dries up. And do you think you can plant love among so much fear?" he asked, with the brush in his hand and a low voice. She didn't answer immediately. She looked into his eyes. Fear doesn't prevent love. It just makes it more fragile. That night, Armando couldn't sleep. It wasn't just affection for Teresa. It was the weight of everything that meant. Falling in love without papers was somehow madness. Because it wasn't just about feelings. It was committing someone to a life full of risks, silences, possible absences. What would happen if one day he couldn't return from work? If he disappeared in a detention center? If Teresa had to explain to Daniela why Mando wouldn't come back? His heart wanted to stay, but reality pushed him to flee. One night, while walking on the sidewalk after buying ice cream with the girl, Armando stopped. "I don't want this to cause you problems," he said without looking at her. "This, me, my situation, my fears, my story." Teresa stopped too. "Do you think a woman like me doesn't know what it's like to live with fear? Do you think I got here on a plane with a visa?" Armando looked at her, surprised. "You too?" "Yes. I crossed the border with my mother when I was 14. We slept 3 nights in the desert. Your papers don't scare me, Armando. What scares me is that you don't trust me." Wuzi, he said nothing, just lowered his head, and in that gesture she hugged him, long, firm, without promises, but full of truth. From that day on, they began to share more than words. Armando no longer slept on the air mattress in Julio's apartment. He started staying some nights in the small back room where Teresa lived. He began to leave his toothbrush, then a shirt, then his tools. Daniela hugged him when leaving for school and showed him her drawings when she returned. She called him "my second dad," though no one taught her that title. Teresa didn't demand anything, but in her gestures you could read everything: trust, hope, desire to build a life. In their own way, they were already doing it. One rainy night, while Armando checked the roof to prevent leaks, Teresa watched him from the kitchen window. When he came down soaked, she was waiting with a towel and hot soup. "You're no longer a stranger here," she said, without beating around the bush. "You're part of this." He didn't respond with words. He hugged her tightly, as if that embrace could protect her from everything he still couldn't offer her. But even in the midst of love, fear didn't go away. On the news, deportation cases were increasing. On Facebook, posts about workplace raids appeared. Some of Julio's acquaintances had been detained. People started talking more carefully, going out less, distrusting everyone. One afternoon, while Armando repaired a gate in Little Havana, he heard 2 men say, "They caught a guy working without papers, took him out in front of his kids. He didn't even have a criminal record." That doesn't matter anymore. Armando felt the hammer slip from his hand. That night he didn't sleep at Teresa's house. He stayed in the truck, in a parking lot far from everything. He needed to think. He needed to breathe without the weight of having so much to lose. The next morning, he returned with dark circles and without words. Teresa looked at him with sweetness, but firmly. "Are you going to run now, just when we have something real?" He lowered his gaze. "I don't want you to see me leave one day without warning. I don't want to be another half-told story." She took his hands. "Then don't be a story of fear. Be a story of struggle." In that moment, Armando knew he had crossed another threshold. He was no longer alone. And that love, the one that didn't ask who you were or what you carried in your pockets, now became the strongest engine to resist what was coming. Because when you truly love, running is no longer an option. Fighting becomes the only way out. The summer of 2006 brought more than heat and humidity. It brought certainties. Teresa and Armando were no longer simply 2 immigrants surviving their own stories. Now they were 2 intertwined lives, betting on something many called madness, building a future with empty hands and no papers. It all started with a simple idea. A satisfied client asked Armando if he knew anyone else who could help with small repairs. "Don't you have a team? You could make more money." Armando thought about it for days, and one night, while they were eating soup with tortillas in Teresa's kitchen, he dropped the idea. "What if I do something more serious? Something of my own?" "A business?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, well, something like that, even if it's informal. I get others, do bigger jobs, charge better, and maybe one day we can formalize everything." Teresa didn't laugh. She didn't look at him with distrust. She looked at him with pride. "If anyone can do it, it's you." Thus was born, in silence and without papers, the seed of what would be his small business. Armando contacted others like him, honest men with rough hands who worked faster than any legal contractor and who only wanted the same thing he did, an opportunity. They organized without a name, without a logo, without registration, just with trust and reputation. "Armando's Renovations," a client said with an amused voice. "That boy really leaves everything like new." The calls started to multiply. Recommendations flew from mouth to mouth, especially among Latino families who preferred to hire someone like them. Hardworking, respectful, and above all, reliable. "I don't have papers," Armando said whenever he could with sincerity, "but if you give me your word, I give you mine." And it worked, because people weren't just hiring a service, they were hiring a story. And Armando's, without him knowing it, was starting to inspire. Teresa, for her part, helped in every way she could. She designed simple cards on the computer, organized payments in a notebook, taught him to use Excel to keep track of materials. "We're going to do this right, even if no one recognizes us," she said, noting each income with a steady pulse. Little by little, they bought better tools, a new drill, a used truck. "Old, but reliable," Armando said while washing it proudly. On weekends, when there was no urgent work, Daniela accompanied her mother to the places where Armando worked. She brought him juice, drew in the yards, told clients innocently, "That's my heart, Dad. He fixes everything." It was a simple life, without luxuries or guarantees, but full of small victories. Each repaired house was more than a job. It was a symbol, an affirmation that even though the system ignored them, they could contribute, build, do things right. One fall morning, while Armando installed a dishwasher in a house in Pinecrest, a client offered him something more. "Don't you want me to recommend you to my brother-in-law? He has properties. He always needs someone reliable." "Sure, if you think I can serve him." "I don't just think so, I'm sure. I showed him your photos and he was impressed." It was the first time someone valued not only his work, but his talent. Teresa celebrated with a simple dinner. "This is a step, Armando. One more step," but each step came with shadows, because the more he exposed himself, the more vulnerable he became. One afternoon, returning from a job in North Miami, he saw a traffic checkpoint. They didn't stop him, but he saw another Latino worker being interrogated by officers, license, papers, insurance. And when the man said he didn't have them, they handcuffed him right there in front of everyone. That night, Armando arrived trembling. Teresa hugged him without saying anything. Daniela fell asleep on his lap while he tenderly stroked her hair. "I don't want to disappear," he whispered with closed eyes. "I don't want her to wait for me and I not come. I don't want to leave you with a broken heart." Teresa looked at him in silence and with a firm voice said, "Then don't do it. Don't hide, but don't expose yourself either." How do you do that? Building more carefully, not big, safely, little by little, like we do. Step by step, but without giving up. That's what they did. They avoided jobs in high-profile neighborhoods. They didn't work with companies, only with individuals. They never put a real address on payment papers. Everything was in cash. No signed promises, but with an ethic worth more than any contract. The Latino community was their greatest shield. Armando was no longer just a worker. He was the guy who always delivers. Teresa was the nurse who helps him. And together, they were a silent example of what could be achieved, even from the shadows. In December of that year, with the little they had saved, they bought a used washing machine and a new bed. It was the first time Armando slept on a firm mattress since he arrived in the United States. "It's like a hotel," he said jokingly, while Daniela jumped on it laughing. Teresa looked at him from the door. "We don't need papers to be family. We already are." And so, between boards, nails, coffee, children's games, handwritten bills and nighttime hugs, Armando was building something that no judge, no law, no patrol could take away from him. A home. If you're enjoying this story, give us a like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to keep up with all our content. In January 2007, while the cold barely touched Miami's streets, the country was beginning to change its mood. The news was getting harsher. Raids were increasing. Politicians' speeches that once seemed distant now became concrete threats. Talking about immigration was no longer an uncomfortable conversation. It was a battlefield. Armando felt it in the air, in the colder looks, in the longer silences, in the new requirements for jobs that used to ask for nothing. Everything seemed to have changed overnight. "You can't walk around so freely, brother," Julio told him one afternoon, while they drank coffee in the backyard. "They're checking papers at Home Depot, on street corners, in parks. A cousin got picked up just for waiting for work with his toolbox on the sidewalk. And what did they do to him? They detained him, sent him to the detention center in Chrome. Says they're going to deport him in less than a month." Armando swallowed hard. That detention center sounded like a death sentence, not literal, but of the dream he had built with so much sacrifice. "And you're okay?" Julio asked, lowering his voice. "Aren't you too exposed with this business thing? I only work with Latinos, with references, nothing that could attract attention." But the truth was that fear got into his bones. For months, Armando had stopped driving in certain areas. He avoided highways with too many checkpoints. He didn't go through Coral Way during the day and never approached government buildings. He changed his route to work 2 or 3 times a week, just in case. Every siren that sounded nearby caused a rush of adrenaline. Every patrol car parked on a corner accelerated his heart. He learned to recognize the sounds. If it was ambulance, firefighters, local police, or immigration, he became an expert at that, as if his life depended, and in fact it did, on those minimal details. At home, he didn't talk about fear. He didn't want to worry Teresa or Daniela. But there were nights when he would sit by the window, looking out at the street, imagining red and blue lights invading his living room. One night, Teresa woke up and found him like that. "Can't you sleep?" "I'm fine. Just thinking." She sat next to him, looked at him in silence, and took his hand. "We can't live with fear all the time." "And how not to?" he asked with damp eyes. "You know how it is. At any moment they can knock on the door and everything ends. You, Daniela, everything we've built." She didn't respond. She hugged him, and in that embrace was the entire response. Despite the fear, life continued. Armando couldn't stop. Bills didn't wait. The needs of the house, the girl, the future they kept dreaming about didn't either. But every decision was heavy, every step measured. When an American client in Coconut Grove offered him a contract to remodel an entire property, Armando thought about it for days. It was good money, yes. But there was too much exposure, many permits he couldn't sign, too many eyes on him. "Don't do it," Teresa told him without hesitation. "Those people call inspectors for everything. They can ruin your life over one complaint." And he turned it down. He lost a big income, but gained peace of mind, or at least a version of it. He started using his middle name more, as a form of protection. He changed his phone chip in case someone traced calls. And he stopped posting photos of jobs on social media. "If someone wants work, let them come by recommendation. I'm not going to give my face to the internet anymore." Paranoia became a companion. He didn't say it out loud, but it was there. It spied on him at every corner, and with it came sadness, because even though he was with Teresa and Daniela, even though he had his small business and a modest life, he could never really feel safe. Sometimes, while Daniela did homework at the kitchen table, he would watch her in silence. "What if one day I'm no longer here?" he thought. "Who's going to explain to her?" One day, a co-worker told him he was thinking about returning to Guatemala voluntarily. "There at least you sleep peacefully. Here you wake up not knowing if you'll return home." Armando understood him, but he couldn't. Not anymore. "I have something here," he said without going into details, because it was true. He was no longer a passing migrant. He could no longer think about going back. His home was in that small apartment, in that family he chose, in that business built with sweat. And then a new fear invaded him. What if fear ended up breaking him from the inside? One night, while reviewing papers and accounts, Teresa sat in front of him. "You can't go on like this, Mando. You have to find a way out. Something legal. A path." "What? Who's going to help me? Who bets on a guy like me?" Teresa looked at him with intense calm. "Someone has to see what you do, not just what you don't have. You're not a number. You're a story that deserves to be told." He lowered his head. "What if there's no happy ending?" She touched his chest. "Then we'll invent one." That night, for the first time in a long time, Armando slept without checking the window. Fear was still there, but for some reason, it felt smaller. In the midst of so much silence, uncertainty and caution, no one expected a light. And yet one day in March 2017, that light came. Not like a sudden lightning bolt, but like a small spark that grew until it illuminated a corner of the destiny that Armando had stopped looking at. It all started with a phone call. Teresa answered the apartment phone while Armando finished installing some curtains. Yes, he lives here. Excuse me? Mr. Harlan? Armando looked at her from the living room. The name sounded familiar. It was an old client, one of the first, an older retired man who lived in Coral Gables and had hired Armando to repair his entire fence a few years ago. "Isn't that the American guy with the White House?" Armando asked while drying his hands. "Yes, that's him. He wants to talk to you. He says it's important." Harlan wasn't like the others. He was polite, soft-spoken, and always treated him with a respect that seemed strange to Armando. There was something different about that man. He listened. He didn't look down on him. Once, he even brought him lemonade in the sun while he worked. "It's not fair for you to suffer so much heat because of me," he had said back then. Armando approached the phone. "Mr. Harlan?" "Armando, what a pleasure to hear from you. I was told you're still in this business, right?" "Yes, sir. We're still working, thank God." "Listen, I have something to tell you, and I need you to take me seriously." What followed left Armando paralyzed for minutes. Harlan explained that for some time he'd been collaborating with a foundation that supported immigrants with special skills, carpenters, electricians, technicians, to help them regularize their status through employers who could demonstrate the need for the worker. "You're excellent, Armando. Responsible, honest, talented. I don't say that lightly. I'm willing to be your sponsor if you accept." "Sponsor?" "Yes, legally. I can help you start a process to get your papers, but there's a condition." That's when the spark turned to shadow. "The process requires you to leave the country. You have to go to your country of origin, apply from the consulate, and then wait for approval to return with a work visa. It's the formal procedure." Armando said nothing. His body tensed as if they had tied a knot in his throat. Leave the country, with everything he had built here, with Teresa, with Daniela, and above all, with the baby that was on the way. Because yes, Teresa was pregnant. 4 months, and Armando already knew it, felt it, lived it. That night, after dinner, he told her what Harlan had offered. "And what are you thinking of doing?" Teresa asked in a calm voice, though there was a storm in her eyes. "I don't know. It's my chance, but also my ruin. If you leave, there's no guarantee they'll let you come back. I know. And if you stay, I remain invisible." Silence enveloped them for minutes. Daniela was sleeping in her room. Outside, the city was still alive, but for them, everything stopped. Teresa came closer and took his hand. "I don't want our child to be born without you. I don't want to explain to a baby why their father isn't here. And if this is my only chance, what if there are no more options later?" He said it with desperation, with fear, with contained anger. He was tired of hiding, of living halfway, of not being able to sign a contract, get a license, travel to see his sick mother. But he was also tired of feeling that at the slightest error, he could lose everything. That night, while Teresa slept with one hand on her belly, Armando went out on the balcony. He sat alone, looking at the distant lights of downtown. He thought about his mother, in Honduras, who was still waiting for him. About the siblings who believed he was a hero. About the years that passed like seconds. About everything he had achieved and everything he still couldn't have. Fear was eating him inside. There was no perfect exit, no choice without pain. During the following days, Harlan's offer was a constant presence, like a lottery ticket burning in his pocket. Tempting, dangerous, hopeful. He consulted with a lawyer they recommended. They explained that for having been out of status for so many years, there was the risk of a 10-year penalty without being able to return if the visa was rejected. It's a risky gamble, Mr. Armando. I won't lie to you, but if it works, it's your ticket to legality. Teresa listened to everything in silence, and when they left the office, she said something that broke him in two. If you go, I won't stop you, but I can't go with you. I can't risk the baby. And if they don't let me come back, then we'll see each other on the other side, someday. That night, Armando didn't sleep. He walked around the apartment. He looked at the walls he had painted himself, the toy shelf he had assembled for Daniela, the coat rack where he hung his only formal shirt, everything he had built with his own hands. And at dawn, with red eyes and a tight heart, he made his decision. A decision that wasn't logical, or fair, or safe. But it was the only one his heart could accept. The decision didn't come with applause or a sigh of relief. It wasn't a movie scene. It was silent, painful, a whisper drowned in the dawn. Armando wouldn't go. He wouldn't leave the country. He wouldn't set foot outside the United States, even if it meant remaining invisible, even if it closed the only door that had been opened. I'm staying, he told Teresa one morning, without beating around the bush, without long explanations. She looked at him without saying anything. Her eyes filled with tears, but not of sadness, of pride. Are you sure? No, but I'm decided. I'm not going to risk missing my child's birth. I'm not going to leave you alone in this. Teresa nodded, touching her belly that was already beginning to round. Then we'll face it together. Deciding to stay didn't eliminate fear. It multiplied it. Because now it wasn't just for him. It was for three. For the family he was forming. For the future he was trying to hold with bare hands. Armando returned to work with more strength but also with more caution. Every time he left in the morning, he said goodbye to Teresa and Daniela as if it were the last time. He learned not to stop saying, I love you, just in case. Don't get like that, Mando, Teresa would tell him when she noticed him distant. No one's going to take away what we're building. How do you know? Because we're doing it with love. And what's born out of love, even if it falls, gets back up. On the street, everything seemed the same houses, the same cars, the same clients calling with last-minute emergencies. But Armando was no longer the same. He carried a whirlwind inside him. Did I do the right thing? He asked himself every night, but it was enough to hear the baby's heartbeat on an ultrasound, or see Daniela sleep hugging one of his shirts, to convince himself that yes, he did. Julio, his cousin, didn't fully understand. How come you didn't go? What if another opportunity doesn't come up? Then it didn't. You're crazy, brother. I'd leave today if they offered me that. And would you leave your child to be born without you? Julio lowered his head. I don't know. I've never had something to lose. That was the difference. Armando was no longer just a migrant looking for dollars. He was a father, a partner, a man with roots. The pregnancy progressed. Teresa got more tired. Daniela became more curious, more attached to Armando. And is the baby going to sleep in my room? She asked over and over. No, my love. We're going to arrange a space for him, Teresa responded. But I want to help. I'm also his big sister, right? Armando smiled. He built her a wooden crib from recycled wood with his own hands, without a manual, without plans, just with love and patience. Teresa painted it white. Daniela stuck star stickers on it. Do you know that crib is illegal? he joked one night, while Teresa caressed her belly. Everything we've done is illegal, but no one can deny it's beautiful. Fear, however, didn't go away. It was still there, at every traffic light, at every patrol car, at every new client who asked, "And where are you from?" Armando learned to live with that knot in his chest. He became an expert at staying quiet, calculating movements, not attracting attention. But one night, that fear became almost unbearable. He was returning from a job in Doral when a traffic checkpoint blocked the avenue. Police with orange vests, flashlights, stopped cars, random inspection. He breathed deeply. He had a fake license, but he knew it wouldn't withstand a serious check. His turn came. The officer asked for documents. Armando handed over what he had with a trembling hand. The policeman looked at the license, then looked at him. "Where are you going?" "Home, sir." "Have you been drinking?" "No, sir." An eternal second. "Move along." Armando could barely breathe. He drove 10 blocks with numb hands. When he got to the apartment, he got out of the car and vomited on the sidewalk. Teresa found him sitting on the stairs, pale as paper. "What happened?" "I was 1 second away from losing everything." That night he didn't say more. He lay in bed hugging Teresa's belly, as if that could anchor him to the world. The next day, he thought about everything he hadn't said, and he wrote a letter to his child in case one day he wasn't there to tell it. "If one day you don't see me anymore, I want you to know I didn't leave because I wanted to. I stayed as long as I could. I fought every day, not with weapons, but with love, because you and your sister are worth more than any paper." He put the letter in an envelope, placed it inside a box with the crib, and closed it with tape. No one knew it was there, only him. Months passed. Teresa got bigger. Daniela counted the days, and Armando worked as if each nail was a declaration of faith, an act of resistance. And then, in an unexpected turn, destiny knocked on his door again. Teresa, moved by exhaustion, fear, and the unconditional love she felt for this man, sat in front of her computer one dawn and wrote something she hadn't planned. A letter, a plea, a story. Armando's story. But that story, written with tears and hope, would change everything. That dawn in August 2019, while Armando slept deeply after an exhausting day, Teresa sat in the living room with a blanket over her shoulders, a cup of cold tea on the table, and her heart beating in her throat. The pregnancy was already in its 7th month. Her body hurt, yes, but what weighed heaviest was the helplessness. Seeing Armando live day after day with his back bent from exhaustion and his soul shrunk by fear was destroying her. That night, she had had a nightmare. She dreamed he didn't come home, that she looked for him, called him, but only received silence. She woke up crying, with her hand on her belly and her soul in pieces. Then she knew. She couldn't stay still. In front of the computer, she opened a blank document and began to write. It wasn't a cold text, or technical, or full of laws. It was a letter that sprang from her heart, with the urgency of someone who knows that time doesn't always forgive those who wait. "My name is Teresa Martinez. I'm a Salvadoran nurse, mother of an 8-year-old girl and pregnant with my 2nd child. I want to tell you about the man who lives with me, who doesn't carry my blood, but who has been more family than many who do." She described Armando in detail, his story since Honduras, his tireless work, his daily struggle to do good without expecting anything in return. She talked about how, even without documents, he had helped repair dozens of homes, how he had built a small business without rights, how his biggest crime was loving and working. Armando is not a threat. He is a hope. He's the kind of man this country needs to protect, not expel. And all I ask is that you listen to his story. Because behind each deportation number, there's a family that can be broken forever. She signed it with her full name, included her phone number, and sent it by email to every place where she found a possibility. Civil rights organizations, immigrant foundations, pro-Dream Act groups, even a state congresswoman known for supporting immigration reforms. She didn't tell Armando, not the next day or the one after. She was afraid that hope would hurt him more than silence. She kept it as an act of faith, like someone planting a seed in dry earth and waiting for rain. 3 weeks passed, until one Friday afternoon, while Teresa prepared rice with chicken and Daniela did homework at the table, her cell phone rang. "Hello? Mrs. Teresa Martinez?" "Yes. Who am I speaking with?" "This is Congresswoman Elena Navarro's office. We received your letter. The Congresswoman wants to speak with you. Could you come to our office next week?" Teresa froze. The rice started boiling over, and Daniela had to tell her, "Mom, the pot!" She hung up trembling, breathed deeply, and went to look for Armando, who was in the bathroom washing his hands. "I need to tell you something." The conversation was a mix of surprise, fear, and gratitude. Armando looked at her as if he couldn't believe it. "A congresswoman? You wrote, and they responded?" "Yes, they responded." "And what did you put?" Teresa showed him the letter. While he read in silence, his eyes filled with tears. When he finished, he said nothing. He just hugged her. "Thank you," he whispered. "I didn't know someone could see so much in me." The following week, they both went to the Congresswoman's office, not without first reviewing every detail, what to say, how to dress, what papers to bring. Armando was nervous like never before. "I seem like a child on the way to a school exam," he joked. Congresswoman Navarro received them with kindness. She was a woman with gray hair, a serene face, and a firm voice. "I read your letter, Mrs. Martinez. It moved me, and it also angered me, because it shouldn't be like this. No family should live with that constant fear." She listened to Armando's story in detail, took notes, asked questions. Then she stood up and told them, "We're going to help you. I don't promise miracles, but I have contacts with lawyers specialized in humanitarian cases. Your situation, if presented well, can be considered for an exceptional adjustment. We're going to try." The attempt began that same week. Documents, recommendation letters, witnesses, photos, work receipts, proof of community ties. Armando's clients, upon learning about it, came forward to help. One wrote, "I have not met a more decent worker than Armando. If this country expels people like him, we're doing everything wrong." Another said, "I don't have family here, but Armando was the one who fixed my roof after the hurricane. He didn't charge me anything extra, even though he knew he could. I trust him more than many with college degrees." In 2 months, they had gathered more than 20 letters. The file was solid, not infallible, but loaded with humanity. The process moved slowly, too slowly. There were days when it seemed everything had stalled, weeks without response, calls that weren't returned, sleepless nights. But at home, the atmosphere was different. There was hope, real, palpable. "Do you think it can turn out well?" Armando asked one night, caressing Teresa's belly. "Yes, this time I believe it." And just when it seemed everything was on pause, the letter arrived, a white envelope, official, with the Department of Homeland Security seal. Armando didn't dare open it alone. He waited for Teresa to arrive from the hospital. Daniela, excited, shouted, "Dad, something came with your name." Teresa opened the envelope, read, then looked at him with eyes flooded with tears. "They gave you an extension, 5 years. You're not legal yet, but they can't touch you while the process is in progress." Armando fell to his knees. He cried. He cried like he hadn't since he was a child. That night, there was no dinner, just hugs, silence, peace. It wasn't the final victory, but it was the first real light in the midst of a darkness that had lasted too long, 5 years. When Teresa said those 2 words, Armando felt as if they had removed a sack of stones from his chest. It wasn't residency, it wasn't citizenship. It wasn't the promise of a happy ending, but it was something. It was time. Time to breathe, to live without looking over his shoulder every time a patrol car approached. Time to be present at his child's birth, to not disappear from one day to the next. That night, after the crying and hugs, Armando did what he did every time he needed to touch the ground of reality. He took out his old notebook, the one where he had written down every expense, every money transfer, every cent earned since he arrived in the country. He opened it to the last page and wrote, "Extension of stay granted. 5 years. Thank you, God. Thank you, Teresa." Daniela, who was already 8 years old, didn't fully understand what that letter meant, but she felt the relief floating in the air like a new breeze. "Does that mean they can't take him away anymore?" she asked, with a seriousness that broke your heart. "Yes, my love," Teresa replied, hugging her. "For now, your dad is safe." The baby was born in October, a strong boy with big eyes like Armando's, whom they named Matias. The birth was complicated. There was tension. Teresa lost a lot of blood, and for a few minutes Armando thought he might lose her or the baby. He waited in the hospital hallway trembling, with pursed lips and clasped hands. When the doctor finally came out and told him they were both fine, Armando collapsed in the chair. He didn't cry, he just stared at the floor in silence, as if he couldn't believe life was giving him a truce after so many years of war. When Teresa woke up in the room, pale but alive, the first thing she said was, "Did you see him?" "He's beautiful," he replied with a broken voice. "And he's fine. You too. Everything's fine." And for the first time in years, it was true. During the following months, the house filled with laughter, baby cries, bottles, diapers, and sleepless nights. Armando worked less. He allowed himself the luxury of saying, "Not today," of staying home to bathe Matias or accompany Daniela to the park. Life was still difficult. The immigration process was on pause, like so many others. The wait was eternal. But the threat was no longer immediate. There was no longer that internal bomb ticking every time he went out on the street. The small business also changed. With the informal backing of the Congresswoman and the echo that his story had caused among clients, Armando received new proposals. "You could work with other immigrants in the same situation," a lawyer told him. "Generate community. Support each other." That's what he did. He contacted Julio and other old acquaintances. He offered them work. They couldn't sign contracts or open a formal business yet, but they started working as an informal cooperative, watching out for each other. If one got sick, another covered for him. If one was detained, the others warned the rest. "We're not a company," Armando said. "We're a family." In 2 years, the group grew. There were 6 men and 1 woman, all undocumented, all fighting, and all grateful. One afternoon, while fixing the roof of a community school damaged by a hurricane, a local journalist who knew Armando's story visited them. He took photos, asked questions, and the following month they published a report titled "Invisible Heroes, Those Who Rebuild Without Being Seen." The story went viral within the Latino community, and for the first time, Armando saw his name in a headline that didn't make him feel afraid. "You're famous, Mando," Teresa joked. "At this rate, you'll run for mayor." "As long as they don't run me out of the country, I'm satisfied," he replied, laughing. But not everything was light. By the end of 2021, Armando received a notification from the Immigration Service. His case had been temporarily filed due to lack of legislative progress. It wasn't a denial, but it wasn't an approval either. Silence returned. The wait returned. That night, he sat with Teresa in the kitchen. "And now?" she asked. "Now we continue, as always." "Aren't you tired?" "Very, but I'd rather get tired fighting than give up standing." Time continued its course. Matias turned 3. Daniela wore glasses now and helped her little brother read. Teresa returned to the hospital, now as a shift supervisor. Armando kept working, though with more care, more patience, and although he still didn't have papers, he had something many citizens failed to build: respect. One afternoon, while collecting tools from a job in Little Havana, a client approached him. "You're Armando, right? From the story." "Depends," he said with a smile. "If it's a good story, yes, that's me. I want you to know that my son started working with you a year ago. He says you taught him more than school did." "I only taught him not to give up. That's worth more than any degree." Armando smiled. He looked at the sky, that sky that for years had seemed hostile, and for the first time felt it belonged to him a little. He still hadn't won the battle, but he had conquered respect, love, and above all, time. And in a world where sometimes you live on borrowed seconds, having 5 years was a priceless luxury. The calendar marked March 2025. Exactly 20 years since Armando had first stepped on American soil with a passport in hand, an expirable tourist visa, and a promise echoing in his head. Work 3 months, save some money, and go back. He never went back. And now, standing in front of the white gate of the house he had just finished renovating in Homestead, with the South Florida sun burning his shoulders and cement dust on his hands, Armando realized something that shook his soul. He had kept his promise. Not in 3 months, not as he had planned, but he kept it. He had transformed not only his life, but that of everyone around him. The business now had a name: Hands of Hope. Legalized, registered, and with a commercial license in Teresa Martinez's name, who represented it while he still waited for his final adjustment. They built it together, brick by brick, invoice by invoice, client by client. The team that started with 3 friends without papers now employed 15 people, many of them migrants like him, in process, waiting for an opportunity, a letter, a permit, a light. Armando had learned to lead without raising his voice, to teach without sermons, to give opportunities without judging, because he knew better than anyone what it was like to be looked down upon, to be left out for not having the right document. "Here we don't ask about your status, just if you're willing to work," he always said. Matias, now 5 years old, ran around between tools with his toy hard hat, while Daniela, 13, wrote essays at school proudly telling the story of her dad without papers who built dreams. "Do you think this is okay to turn in?" she asked him one night, showing him a paragraph where she said, "My dad was never afraid to work, even though the world told him he couldn't." "Yes, honey, it's perfect. Just Change was never afraid to, was afraid every day, but did it anyway," Armando told her, stroking her hair. The respect he had cultivated in his community was something that couldn't be measured in papers. They called him for labor rights conferences, for talks at community schools, for reports, no longer as the illegal immigrant, but as a living example of silent dignity. Once at a local meeting organized by the neighborhood church, the pastor said out loud, "Everyone here knows Armando, and if this country had 10,000 like him, it wouldn't need political speeches." Armando blushed. He laughed nervously, but inside he felt something explode in his chest, pride, a clean pride. That came from having resisted, from having loved, from having said, "I'm not leaving," when everything pushed him to run away. The final immigration hearing still hadn't come. His case remained under review, but he no longer lived chained to fear. He had lawyers, community support, recognition, and above all, he had roots. Firm, real. One morning, while drinking coffee with Teresa on the small front terrace of their house, one he had built himself, she looked at him and said, "Do you remember when you stayed because you were afraid of not seeing Matias being born?" "Of course." "Well, everything that came after was because of that decision." Armando looked at her. He looked at Matias playing with a broken toy car and at Daniela practicing guitar on the porch. "I wouldn't change it for anything," he said. "If I had to go through it all again, I would. Every tear, every sleepless night, every siren, everything. Because what we built, it was worth every risk. Teresa kissed him on the cheek. You're the bravest man I know. I'm a man who was lucky to find a woman who believed in him. And so, without final papers, but with all the foundations of a real life, Armando continued forward. One day, Matias, while accompanying him to a job site, asked, "Dad, were you born here?" "No, son, I came from very far away." "And why did you stay?" "Because when I arrived, I found you." Armando's story wasn't told in congresses or on national networks. It didn't make noise. It didn't change laws, but it did change lives. And in a world where fear silences and the system pushes, he resisted with the only thing that can't be deported: love. He didn't have documents for many years, but he had his word. He had courage. He had family. And in the end, that's what truly legalized him before the world. Because true pride isn't in a passport. It's in the hands that build, even when they tremble, in the backs that carry, even when they hurt, and in the hearts that love, even when they live with fear. And if you like this story, you'll surely love the next one that appears on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and turn on notifications. Until next time.